I want you to picture a, a, a list of things that just seem completely disconnected from one another.
Okay.
So we've got a massive federal government database, a state ministry down in Australia, a United Nations Human Rights Convention,
Right?
a frontier AI company's ethics rules, a defense contractor data breach, and finally, a federal regulator's resume.
I mean, it sounds like the board in a detective's office, right? You know, the one covered in pushpins with the red yarn zigzagging everywhere, just trying to connect a bunch of completely random events.
Exactly. And you might look at that list and think, well, these are separate stories about entirely separate systems. But they aren't.
They really aren't.
In this deep dive, we're going to show you that every single one of those examples represents the exact same institutional design pattern. And this pattern has been reproduced across the globe by entities that have, never spoken to each other. They've never collaborated, never shared a whiteboard.
Yeah, the sources refer to this synthesis, the through line we're looking at today, as the architecture of silence.
The architecture of silence.
Right. It's this realization that this specific design architecture finally has a name. And what we are doing today is forensically examining a single blueprint of institutional blindness.
And we should clarify, we aren't here to despair about this.
No, not at all. We aren't here to just, express outrage at what might initially look like 8 separate glitches. We are here to look at the architecture of a system that is functioning exactly as it was intended to function.
Yeah, I was actually trying to visualize this blueprint while reviewing the research. And I want you to imagine looking at the architectural plans for 8 different buildings across the world.
Okay, like a skyscraper in New York, a hospital in London.
A school in Tokyo, exactly. And you notice that in every single blueprint, every single room is missing a door.
Just completely walled off.
Right. And at a certain point, you have to stop calling it a construction error. You have to realize somebody drew it that way on purpose. I mean, it is the architectural plan.
Yeah, and to recognize this design pattern out in the wild, we first have to look at its most perfectly executed foundational model.
The baseline.
Exactly. The sources point us directly to the U.S. federal state adoption identity architecture. This is the blueprint in its absolute purest form. If you want to see how an institution learns to just look right through a human being, this is where you start.
Which brings us to the AFCARS database.
Mm-hmm.
That stands for the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System.
Right.
It is the comprehensive federal ledger of adoption in the United States.
And what really requires our attention here is just the sheer overwhelming granularity of this database.
Massive.
It is. We're talking about 186 highly specific data points tracked on every single child processed through it.
Wait, 186.
Exactly 186. I mean, the system captures the exact date parental rights were severed. It tracks the exact date the adoption was finalized. It holds a massive array of demographic data, behavioral notes, legal milestones. I mean, it is a masterpiece of bureaucratic scrutiny.
Which makes the omissions so glaring. I mean, they have the technological capacity and the mandate to track 186 different pieces of data about a human life. But there is zero field for the child's original name. None. It is a deliberate null value in the schema.
Yeah, and we don't have to guess if it's deliberate. The agency's own rulemaking history openly acknowledges that they strip identifying data specifically so the child's identity isn't revealed.
Wow.
The database is built right there on the public record to take that original identity and ensure it is never given back to the person it actually belongs to.
Wait, I have to push back on the intent here. Because a lot of people listening would look at that and say, well, isn't this just a standard bureaucratic privacy measure?
Right, like an outdated system.
Yeah, exactly. An old system designed to protect people's data from being leaked.
I get that. But we have to treat the adoptee experience as the definitive expertise here, rather than just trusting the agency's stated intentions.
Okay, fair.
And when you listen to what adoptees detail about how the system functions mechanically, a critical distinction emerges. This isn't privacy for the adoptee. It is secrecy from them. Privacy means you, as an individual, control your own information and decide who gets to see it.
Yeah.
Secrecy means an institution controls your information and specifically hides it from you.
Wow. So by stripping the name, the system isn't protecting the individual at all. It's protecting the transaction.
Exactly. Which brings us to the second half of the architecture. The federal system purposely erases the record, but the state level completes the erasure.
Right, the amended birth certificate.
Yeah. When an adoption is finalized, the state issues an amended birth certificate, and this legal document names the adoptive parents as if they physically gave birth to the child.
It just rewrites reality.
It does. The original fact of the child's beginning is just legally sealed.
So the state isn't just protecting the adoptive parent's privacy. It's legally mandating that the adoptee's original identity never existed. I mean, that is a massive distinction.
It's total erasure.
And the sources point out that as of this research, in 33 states and Washington, D.C., an adult adoptee still requires a judge's permission, like a literal court order, just to see the original document of their own birth.
Just to see their own truth.
Right. So the federal system erases the record from the database, and the state buries the physical paper that's left.
And, you know, an architectural blueprint, this resilient one that spans federal databases and state law so flawlessly, it doesn't just self-assemble.
No, somebody had to draw it.
Somebody had to draw it, and somebody has to actively maintain it.
Well, the database schema certainly doesn't write itself. And the sources transition here from the structural blueprint to the actual architects who hold the pen.
Right.
We are looking at a meticulously documented, primary source verified case of regulatory capture, a 48-year arc.
Yeah, let's look at the timeline. It begins in 1978. An adoption agency called the Edna Gladney Home funds the creation of a new organization.
The National Council for Adoption.
Right, the NCFA. And its purpose from day one was clear. The practice of sealing records was coming under pressure, and the industry realized it needed a dedicated body to defend the closed record system.
So they essentially built their own shield.
Exactly. And for the next 2 decades, the president of the NCFA is a man named William L. Pierce.
And the research traces how Pierce personally lobbied figures, right? Like Senators John Tower and Jeremiah Denton.
He did. His specific goal was to strip open records provisions from Jimmy Carter's Model State Adoption Act.
Wow.
And he was incredibly effective at the mechanics of lobbying. I mean, Pierce didn't just play defense, he went on the offense, driving the Uniform Adoption Act through state legislatures in the 1990s.
So he essentially codified the legal architecture that every single presidential administration since then has just simply inherited and maintained.
Exactly. The industry wasn't just reacting to federal adoption policy, they built the organization that helped write it.
Okay, so fast forward 48 years from the founding of the NCFA to early 2026. A man named Ryan Hanlon is appointed Associate Commissioner of the Federal Children's Bureau.
Right. And we have to ask, who is Ryan Hanlon?
Well, for the 3 years prior to this federal appointment, he was the president and CEO of that exact same organization, the NCFA.
Yeah, the very same. And before that, he ran an adoption agency. Now he is sitting in the chair at the Children's Bureau.
Unbelievable.
He is administering the AFCARDS database, he's setting national child welfare policy, and he's overseeing roughly $12 billion in annual child welfare financing.
I mean, if you pitch that to a movie studio, they'd reject it for being too on the
Oh,
nose.
absolutely.
The shadowy lobbyist seizing control of the $12 billion government agency. But I want to pause and just challenge this framing for a second. Are we actually looking at a conspiracy here? Is this some smoky backroom deal where money changed hands in the dark?
No, and honestly, treating it like a scandal misses the point entirely. Because this is a structural design pattern, there was no smoky backroom, there was no bribe, there wasn't even a Senate confirmation required for this appointment.
Really?
Yeah, it is entirely legal, ordinary, and out in the open. It's not a bank robbery. It's a 48-year-long interview for the job of bank manager.
Wow.
The industry simply waited for the door to be held open by a standard presidential appointment.
They just held their ground and waited them out.
And the access ran in both directions the entire time. I mean, look at the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute.
CCAI.
Right. It's a bipartisan caucus. And for decades, they've handed out something called the Angels in Adoption Award to sitting legislators.
And those legislators are nominated by adoption agencies in their own districts, right?
Exactly. It's a formalized handshake.
And the sources note Ryan Hanlon received that exact award in 2022 while he was running the NCFA.
Yep. So in 1978, the industry needed a lobbyist to work the outside of the door. By 2026, their own former president simply is the regulator. He walked right through the door.
Man, so we've seen how the U.S. adoption system builds and protects this blind spot. We've seen the 186-point schema that drops the name, and we've seen this 48-year lobbyist to regulator pipeline that maintains it.
Right.
But here is where this deep dive really moves from a specific industry to a universal logic.
Yeah.
because the sources show this exact same missing field recurring in institutions that have literally nothing to do with adoption.
Yeah, once an institution figures out that managing a population at scale is just easier when you erase the individual, that logic becomes highly attractive to any system managing massive amounts of data.
Or massive amounts of people. So let's look at how that logic infects data architecture. We talked earlier about the state sealing the amended birth record, but there's a federal database that holds biological parentage, right? The Social Security Administration's Numinant database.
Right, which is populated via the SS5 architecture.
Break that down for us.
Sure. So for clarity, the SS5 is the application form for a Social Security number, and that requires the names of the birth parents. The Numinant is the master database storing all those applications.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, legally, an adoptee cannot access their own unredacted SS5. The system is closed to them. But the sources outline how this exact data was allegedly taken out the back door by an operative linked to DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency Framework.
Oh, wow.
And it was funneled to Leidos, which is a massive defense contractor.
So wait, my own original identity is legally sealed for me, the individual it actually belongs to.
Right.
But it's simultaneously exfiltrated and sold to a defense contractor.
Exactly. The system goes completely blind when the individual asks for their own truth, but it suddenly has 20/20 vision when there is a market or state interest in the data.
That is just wild. And we see that same architectural blindness expressed in artificial intelligence, too.
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at Anthropic, one of the frontier AI labs, and their constitutional framework for the Claude model.
Yeah, and when we talk about a constitutional framework for a large language model, we are talking about the core rulebook the AI uses to weigh answers and align its ethics.
Right, and Anthropic wrote 23,000 words on ethical reasoning.
23,000 words. And the word adoption is entirely absent from those 23,000 words.
It's completely absent.
But how does an AI company enforcing ethical alignment mechanically force a blind spot? I mean, how does that work?
It comes down to Anthropic's balance doctrine.
Okay.
Their even-handedness protocol trains the model to produce a both sides default output, regardless of whether a domain has a legitimate other side.
I see.
So if the AI is mechanically forced to weigh the documented institutional trauma of a child equally against the good intentions of the agency that processed them, it neutralizes the harm.
Right, it's like writing a rule book for a referee where they're forced to give equal points to the player who was fouled and the player who committed the foul.
That's a perfect analogy. A company built on careful ethical reasoning ends up with a blind spot shaped exactly like the AFCAR's database.
It's the exact same missing door, just expressed in constitutional philosophy instead of a database schema.
Exactly.
But surely, international human rights law gets this right. Let's talk about the United Nations.
Well, let's look at the UNCRC. That's the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Right.
It is the most ratified human rights instrument in the world. Signed by 196 countries.
And the sources utilized a governance visibility tool to score the UNCRC. Think of this tool like an X-ray for bureaucracy. It scans a document and asks a specific mechanical question.
Right, it asks, does this rule require the child to actually speak for themselves, or does it just require an adult to speak for them?
Right. And on a baseline, the UNCRC scores 62 out of 100, which is, not great, but passing.
But watch what happens when you honestly weight that score using the X-ray.
Okay.
When you recompute the math by heavily weighting the rights that require the child's active voice domains like consent, agency, and self-determination, the score absolutely plummets to a 26 out of 100.
Walk me through that math. How do you lose 36 points just by changing the weight of the categories?
Well, the gap collapses entirely in the areas where the person would need to be present as a self-determining individual rather than just a managed subject.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the UNCRC scores highly on protection, which is an action an adult performs upon a child, but it scores disastrously on agency, which requires the child to act.
Wow. So the most ratified human rights instrument in the world was not built to see the rights that require the subject to actually speak.
Exactly.
So are the UN and AI developers purposefully copying the U.S. adoption industry? Did Anthropic engineers look at AFCARs and say, hey, let's do that?
No, they didn't need to coordinate at all. When you hand any institution the same brief, govern population at scale, manage the category, keep the ledger, every institution independently solves it the exact same way.
They make the individual person optional.
Exactly. It is the default answer to governing people when no one is forced to ask what happens to the one person who doesn't fit the category.
Which brings us to the final and really the most visceral part of these sources. We've been talking about abstract frameworks, right? Data exfiltration, LLM alignment, UN treaties.
Yeah, it can get pretty theoretical.
What? But we need to shift the lens to the physical reality of what happens when a system is designed to not see you. We have to look at the real bodies caught in the machinery.
We do. And for that, we look to Queensland, Australia. The Anastasio Commission delivered a massive report.
1,384 pages.
1,384 pages detailing the state's severe child safety failures.
Just a mountain of systemic failure. And who is the minister responsible for acting on it?
Amanda Kam. Furthermore, the previous minister, Deb Frecklington, is documented as having actively rolled back adoptee information access.
It's just roadblock after roadblock. And the numbers attached to this are staggering. The state costs a child in out-of-home care at $500,000.
A $500,000 ledger entry attached to a physical person who has no number attached to their original name.
That is heavy.
The system manages the massive financial portfolio. It tracks the expenditure flawlessly, but it totally obscures the human being at the center of the transaction.
If you want to see the ultimate, irreversible human cost of this institutional blindness, the sources bring us back to the United States with Operation True Parent.
Yeah, this is where it gets incredibly dark. By early 2026, it was revealed that at least 49 adoptees who were legally brought to the U.S. as children were facing deportation.
These are adults who were raised as U.S. citizens. They grew up here, went to school here, they paid taxes here.
Right.
But they discover in adulthood that their citizenship paperwork was never finished. And who was supposed to finish it?
The exact same institutional apparatus that processed their adoptions.
Unbelievable. And some of these individuals are facing deportation to countries where their faith or who they have become is literally criminalized.
It's a life or death situation for them.
But let me play devil's advocate again,
Yeah.
because this is a really heavy accusation to level at a system. Isn't missing citizenship paperwork just a tragic, accidental oversight? Bureaucracy moves slowly, papers get lost in the mail. Surely that is mechanically different from the intentionally sealed amended birth certificates we talked about earlier.
It is vital that we don't let the system off the hook by calling this a bureaucratic oversight.
Okay.
The amended birth certificate and the missing citizenship paperwork are not two separate failures. They are the exact same decision, made decades apart, about whose paperwork is actually worth finishing.
Wow.
Think about it. The system flawlessly executed the paperwork that created the adoptive family structure, the amended birth certificate. It had the resources and the efficiency to do that. But it entirely abandoned the paperwork that would have secured the legal safety and autonomy of the adoptee. That is not an accident. That is the architecture functioning exactly as designed.
The architecture of silence. Man. So what does this all mean? We've gone on an intense intellectual journey today. We've looked at the AFCAR schema, the 48-year Pierce-to-Hanlon lobbying arc, AI constitutional doctrines, UN governance scoring, and deportation policies.
And a lot.
It is. But this is not just a list of 8 random glitches.
No, it is a synthesis of a single, undeniable truth about governance. What the sources have demonstrated is that this body of work has built a repeatable forensic method.
Right, the schema audits, the foreseeability timelines, the governance scoring, the provenance of appointments.
This isn't an anecdote. This is a falsifiable claim. They tested this forensic method 8 times across vastly different domains, and it returned the exact same verdict every single time.
Because outrage at one single institution is something the system can easily absorb, right? They know how to handle a bad news cycle or a lawsuit.
Exactly. But a repeatable methodology is a weapon they cannot defend against.
Yeah.
When you can mathematically prove the UNCRC fails the child, when you can audit the database schema and prove the erasure was an intentional null value, when you can map a 48-year straight line from a lobbyist to a regulator,
You completely strip away their plausible deniability.
you force them to answer for their actual blueprints instead of letting them hide behind their PR and their mission statements.
Which brings us right back to those blueprints we talked about at the very beginning. The 8 different buildings where every single room is missing a door. We know now that it wasn't a mistake. It was the plan all along.
And once you can name that architecture, you cannot find any of these institutions innocent of it.
So here's our final thought for you to take away from this deep dive. A challenge based on what we've unpacked today. Take this repeatable forensic method. Take the schema audit, the governance scoring, the timeline tracking, and point it at a 9th institution.
Yeah, pick whichever system, government body, or corporate framework you were told was different, the one you were assured was safe.
Run the exact same test. Look for the missing field. Look for where the individual person is mathematically made optional. It will not come back clean. Because this institutional blindness was never about the specific subject matter. It was always about the mechanics of control. What happens when you finally realize that every single institution built to govern people at scale will fail them in the exact same place until you force them to draw the door back into the blueprint?